Alright everyone, so now we're going to talk about the last type of calculations that we have in Tableau, the table calculations. And here we have different functions like the running, window, rank, first, last, index, lookup. We're going to talk about all those functions in this tutorial. So as usual, first we're going to understand the concept behind the table calculations, then we're going to go back to Tableau in order to start practicing. So let's go. The first question is, what are table calculations? Well, they are calculations that's going to be executed or performed after the aggregation is done on the visualizations. So they're going to aggregate the aggregations in Tableau. And it's important to understand the level of details. It's going to be depending on the visualizations. So that means here again, the dimensions in the view going to control the level of details. And now to the big difference between the table calculations and the others, the calculation is going to be performed on the data that we see in the view. So Tableau will not go to the data source and query the data. Tableau going to query the data that is presented in the view. So that means the view going to be querying the view itself. It's going to send a query to the data inside the visualizations, and the view going to return the result back to the view itself. So we are not going back to the data source. Everything going to be queried inside the view. And the other three type of calculations, like the aggregate calculations, LOD, and row level calculations, they always going to query the data from the data source and bring the result to the view. Only this type of calculation going to query the data in the view. Alright guys, in order to create table calculations, we have to define two things. First, the scope. Second, we have to define the directions. The scope means which data can be included in one calculation. For example, we have the following view. It looks like a table, right? So we have here rows and we have multiple columns. But here we can see that our data is split by groups. Each group can be defined by the dimension quarter. So we have the Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. So now the first option that we have is the whole table. That means the calculation can include everything inside this table. It will ignore any partitions that we have inside this table. So it's going to start from the first value and it's going to end up by the last value. Moving on to the next scope or to the next option, we have the pane. This time the calculation is going to focus on a smaller scope. This time we're going to focus on the partition or the group of data, which is defined by the quarter. So that means the table calculation is going to be done for each group separately. So we're going to have for those 3 rows calculations, then we can move to the second group, to the third group, and so on. Moving on to the last scope, we have the cell. So it's going to be only one value inside the view. The scope going to be very small, including only one individual value. So here we have to define for Tableau the scope of the calculations. Is it going to be the whole table, or only the pane, only the group of data, or only one cell? Alright, the next thing that Tableau needs from us is the direction of the calculations. How the calculation going to move through our table. So here we have 4 different options. The first one going to be down. That means we're going to start from the top value and we're going to move down until we reach the bottom. And that's of course going to depend on the scope, whether we are running the whole table or only a group of values like we have in the pane. And in this example, we have the table down. That means we are processing all the values in one calculations from top to bottom. Then it's going to reset and move to the second column, and we're going to do the same thing for the next year. So that means this time the calculations is moving through the columns in one go. So it starts from the first year and it end up with the next year. Then it's going to reset and start for the next row and so on. So we are moving from left to right. So those 2 methods are the basics. Either you're going to move down or you're going to move right. The next 2 directions, it's going to be mixing those 2 methods. So the first one going to be down then across. So that means first we have to go down through the table and then we have to go across. So it's going to start from the top first, then go to the bottom, but this time it will not reset and move to the next column. It's going to continue doing the aggregations. So it's going to go to the right across, then it's going to move again from top to bottom, then across, top to bottom until we reach the last value. So that means here we don't have any resets. It's going to continue the calculations through all values. It's not like the first 2 methods where we have resets for each row over here or for each column. This time the starting value going to be the top left and the last value going to be the bottom right. Moving on to the last direction that we have, I think you got it already. It's exactly the opposite. First we do across, then we're going to do down. So here again there is no resets. We're going to start with the first value on the top left, and then we go to the right first, then we jump to the next row, then we go to the right, we jump down, right until we reach the last value on the bottom right. So that means the calculation first gonna move right and then it's gonna jump down to the next row. Alright, so as you can see, it's not that hard once you get it. We have 4 different directions and 3 different scopes that Tableau needs from us in order to create table calculations. Alright guys, in Tableau we have different methods on how to create table calculations depend on the difficulty. The first method that we have is the quick table calculations. So as the name says, it's very quick and easy to create. So here we have a list of different table calculations and you don't have to configure anything. You just have to click on the function that you need and Tableau can do the rest. So here we have a very common table calculations like the running total, the difference, rank, moving average and so on. The second method is going to be not that quick. We have to configure a few stuff, but still we are not writing any functions or any calculations. Still we are clicking around. But here we have more options and more control to configure the table calculations if you compare to the first one. The first one is just selecting the function and that's it. So here again we have very similar functions. We have the rank, running total, moving calculations. And then we can define different options like the scope, which dimensions can control the table calculations and so on. Moving on to the last method on how to create table calculations, we can do it by creating a new calculated field and then use the functions that are used for the table calculations. And here we have a list of many functions that you can use in order to do table calculations, but they are a little bit harder if you compare to the first 2 methods in order to create table calculations. So as you can see, as you are moving from left to right, things gets harder, but with that you are getting the full control and the full options. And next we will go back to Tableau in order to try those 3 methods, and we're gonna try a few functions that we have inside the table calculations. Alright guys, so back to Tableau, let's go to the big data source, let's go to the product and get the usual stuff. So we're gonna get the category, subcategory, and the sales as usual to the cells over here. So now I'm going to show you the different methods on how to create table calculations, and we're going to start with the first one. We have the quick table calculations, which is the easiest one. In order to do that, we're going to do it on the view, so it's going to be only locally available for this view. It's not like creating a new calculated field. So we're going to go to our measure over here, right click on it, and then here we have 2 options. The first one says add table calculations, and the second one gonna be quick table calculations. The first one is the middle one that I showed you previously in the presentation, where you have to configure different stuff, but the second one is the easiest one and the quickest one, where we can create table calculations with only 1 click. So now let's go and check the quick table calculations. If you go over here, you will find a list of different table calculations, and we can go over here and let's check, for example, the running total. So click on that, and here there is 2 things to be noticed. First, the numbers here changed because here we have different aggregation functions, and as well we have here a new icon in the measure. Tableau here wants us to quickly identify whether the measure is using aggregate calculations or table calculations. So if you see the triangle, that means this measure is using table calculations. So as you can see, with only 1 click, we have created table calculations. Here we have the running total. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna explain it step by step later. Well, now you might say, you know what? We didn't define anything. The scope, the directions for the calculations. So how we can do that? If you go back to our measure, to the table calculations, right click on it, and you can find now we have more options once we convert it to table calculations. And exactly here, the computing using, we have those options. So here we can define the scope, table, pane, cell, and as well the directions. And as well, you can see that we have different options like clear table calculations if you want to remove it back to the aggregate calculations. So once you do that, you can see we got back our sum of sales without the icon. Well, that means we are not using anymore the table calculations. We are using now the aggregate calculations. So that's all for the first method, how to quickly create table calculations in Tableau, but we don't have a lot of options to configure. That's why we have the second method where we have more options to control the table calculations. But again, we're going to create it locally only for this view, so it will not be available for the data source. Alright, so before I show you how to do that, we're going to get one more dimension to our view. So let's get the years of the order date, and I would like to have only 3 years, so I'm going to show it as a filter. I'm just going to remove the first 2 years in order to have fewer data in the view. So now in order to create table calculations only for this view with more options, we're going to go back to our measure, the sum of sales. Currently it is an aggregate calculations, but we want to convert it to table calculation. So right click on it, and this time we're going to move to add table calculations for the first option. So as you can see, we have this small icon indicate that this is table calculation. So click on that and we will get a new window here to configure our table calculations. So what do we have here? The first thing that we have to define is the type of calculations. So we have here a menu of different functions for the table calculations. Again, here the running total, the rank, differences, and so on. So let's stick with the first one, the differences from. So here we have to define for Tableau two things, the scope and the directions, and they are always together. They are not split as options. So the first one going to be table across, and Tableau here did really great job by highlighting how the calculation gonna work. So as you can see, Tableau here highlighting with the yellow color how the calculation is gonna be performed. It's just to help you to understand how it's gonna work. It's really great. So we have the table across from left to right, then we have the table down from top to bottom, and then we have the option of across then down, and as you can see, it's gonna affect the whole table since we move from the top left to the bottom right. Then we can define the other scope, like for example the pane down. So as you can see now, the scope is smaller compared to the table down. So now the table down include everything in this column, but the pane down can include only this group. So as you can see, our view is split to 3 groups based on the category. So we have the first group over here, the second and the third, and Tableau is highlighting the first group. So it is like a partition. And another option, we have the cell, where Tableau can highlight only one value, or we can define specific dimension to do the calculations. So here we have a list of all dimensions that we have inside the view, and you can go and select what the scope gonna be, whether it's gonna be the subcategory or the year of order dates. Then each function that we have has more specifications. For example, here, what are the values that are relevant for this calculation? Again, here, don't worry about it. I'm gonna explain how the difference works as well in Tableau. So here we do have to define whether it's the previous, next, first, and so on. So each function in Tableau has different options. So for example, if you go to the rank, you will find over here, we don't have now those previous, next, and so on, but instead we have different options to configure the rank. So each Tableau calculation function here has different set of options to be configured. Alright guys, so that's all for this method. As you can see, we got more options compared to the first one. Let's go and close this, and let's say that we are interested to have this calculation for all other worksheets. So we want to reuse it. In order to do that, we're going to go to our measure and just drag and drop it here on the data pane, and with that we got a new calculated field. So this time we are using the rank of sales, so I can go and rename it rank and sales, and with that we got a new field on our data pane and we can reuse it in different worksheets. Alright guys, so now we're gonna move to the last methods in how to create table calculations in Tableau. We're gonna go and create a new calculated field and use functions. So let's go and do that. We will start with the function index. So let's create a new calculated field. We can call it index, and the syntax is very simple. So start with index and that's it. We don't need to specify anything for this function. So as you can see, the calculation is valid. Let's click OK, and with that we got a new measure, new calculated field. Let's go and check the results. So I'm just gonna drag and drop it on the view. So what this function does is it's gonna return the position number of the current value. So that means the first position in this view gonna be the first row as we are moving from top to bottom. So this is gonna be the position number 1, position number 2, 3, 4, and so on until we get the last value as the last position. So now you might notice that we are calculating all the rows in the table. So we are using the scope of the table. We can check that if we go over here to our measure and right click on it, and we can see that the compute using is the table down. Let's say that we would like to have an index for each group, not for the whole table. So let's go and switch it to the pane down. So now as you can see, the calculation gonna depend on the pane, not the whole table. So for the first group, we have the first row, the bookcases, then the second, third, fourth, and so on. Then it go and reset for the second group. So on the second group, it's gonna be this row gonna be the number 1, and the last position or the index in this group gonna be the supplies, and not the last one, the fonts. So as you can see, it always reset for each group because we have specified the scope only for the pane. And now if you go and switch it to the cell, so let's go and do that, computing using cell, you can see that each cell gonna be the first value. So the position number for each row gonna be 1. So this is how it works with the scoping in Tableau. Alright, so now let's go and switch it back to a table. So computing using table down. So as you can see, it's very simple. Let's go and try another function in Tableau. We're gonna use this time the first function. So let's create a new calculated field. We're gonna call it first, and the function gonna be as well really easy. It's gonna be first, and that's it. It's like the index. You don't have to specify anything. inside the calculation. So the calculation is valid. Let's go and hit OK and check the result as well in the view. So let's drag and drop it over here. Now we can see that Tableau assigning the first row with the value of 0, and as we are moving down with the values, as you can see, the numbers are decreasing. And those numbers gonna be how many steps do we have until we reach again the top to the 0. So here, for example, we need 3 steps until we reach the first row, and as well here we have -11 until we reach the top value. So here we have like a distance between each row and the first row. And in Tableau, there is another function where it does exactly the opposite. It's going to be the last. So let's go and try it. So let's go and create a new calculated field. It's going to be the last function, not in this tutorial. So it's going to be last. And as well, it doesn't need any fields inside it. So that's all. The calculation is valid. Let's go and hit OK. And let's drag and drop it on the view over here. So now we can see that it has exactly the opposite effect of the first. So Tableau gonna go and assign the last value in our view with the 0, and as you are moving to the top, the value is gonna increase. And here again we have the distance, or how many steps do we have until we reach the last values. Okay guys, we have one more function that is very similar to the last first index, where it gonna like gives us the position number of the rows. We have the rank function. So let's go and create a new calculated field. We're going to call it rank, and it starts with the keyword rank. And as you can see, we have 5 different functions on how to rank the data. We're going to start with the easiest one, the first one. So let's select rank, and here we can specify 2 things for Tableau. The first one can be the expression or the aggregate functions. In this view, we have the sum of sales. So let's go and define that, sum of sales. And the second information that Tableau needs it as an optional, it's going to be how to sort it, ascending or descending. If you leave it empty, Tableau going to use it as a default, the descending method. So let's stay with the defaults. That's all. The calculation is valid. Let's go and hit OK. And with that, we got a new calculated field. Let's drag and drop it to the view to check the results. So now we can see that Tableau goes and ranks all the subcategories based on the sales, sum of sales. So we can see over here that the fonts has the highest sales, and we have it as a rank 1. And then the second highest sales, we have it over here as a 2 for the chairs. Alright guys, so now if you look at those 4 functions and the results, you can see that they are very similar to each other, right? They're gonna define the position number of the rows using different methods. So now you might ask, what are the use cases of those 4 functions? Well, generally there are 2 use cases. First, we can use it as a filter in the visualizations, and second, we can use it in another calculations. So for the first use case, for example, let's go and pick the rank and show it as a filters to the users. They go and specify, for example, the top 5 subcategories in the visual. And you already know that there are different methods on how to show the top product or the top subcategories in the visualizations, and this is one method on how to do that. Or we might be in a situation where we have a very big visualizations, a lot of rows, and I would like to show for the users only the first 5 rows without any specifications or ranking or anything. We can just go and show the first 5 rows. So in order to do that, we go to the first and show it as a filters. Let's go and reset the rank. So we can go over here and define, okay, I would like to see the first 5 rows. Or the opposite, we want to show the last 5 rows. So we can go to the last and show it as a filter. Let's go and reset the first. So now we can go over here and say, okay, I would like to see the last 5 rows inside my view. So this is the first use case for these very simple table calculations functions. We can use them as a filter. Alright guys, moving on to the second use case for these functions. I usually use them in another calculations to generate a reference line. Let's have a quick example. Let's go and create a new worksheet. We're going to take the order date to the columns and as well the sales to the rows. And this time we're going to have the months as well. So let's change it from year to month. And I would like to have it as a bar diagram. And as usual, I want to show the labels and as well the colors from the measure. So the task now is to show a reference line based from the first value in the diagram. So we have the first value of 21,000. So I would like to have it as a reference in order to compare the other months with it. So we can do that using the function first, but we have to add it in another calculations. Now, in order to make it simpler to see how this works, I'm just going to go and duplicate this view in order to make it like a table. So let's go to the show me over here and switch it to a table. And then I'm going to take the months to the rows. Now we have a very nice table. I would like now to have the first value as a new calculated field. Okay, and I would like as well to add to this view the values from the first function. So let's go and get the field that we already created and drop it on the view. So as you can see, the first row in this table is going to be the January 2018. So we have the value of 0, and I would like to show now the sales only for this row. I'm not interested with the other rows. Only for the first row, we have to show the sales. So in order to do that, we have to go and create a new calculated field. So let's call it first sales. And the logic can be like this. We're going to check if first function equal to 0. So if we are at the first row, as you can see, we have here the 0 value. What can happen? We want to show the sales. So it's going to be then sum, and we can have the field sales. Otherwise, we don't want to show the sales. So that means we can go and end the if statements. So with that, as you can see, if the position number is going to be 0, like the first one, then show the sales. Otherwise, don't show anything. So let's go and hit OK. And with that, as usual, we got our new measure. Let's drag and drop it to the view over here. And as you can see, Tableau going to show the sales only if the first equals to 0. And if not, as you can see, we don't have anything. So with that, we got the first value in the sales, and now we can go and use it as a reference line. In order to do that, we're going to go back to our original sheet, and let's go and add our new calculated field to the details. Then let's go to the axis, to the sales, right click on it and add reference line. The value going to be based on our new calculated field. So let's go and switch it to the first of sales. And we can go as well and change the label from computations to custom. And we can say, okay, this is the first. So that's it. Let's go and hit OK. Now, as you can see, we got our new reference line, and the value of this reference line going to be based always from the first value. So as you can see, it's going to be 21,000. So we can go now and compare the other values to our reference line. And as well, this can be very dynamic. So that means, for example, let's go and add a filter to our view. So let's go to the order date and show the filter. So now what can happen if we deselect the 2018, the first value gonna be from January 2019. So here we're gonna get the 47,000 as a reference line. So with that, we can understand the power of table calculations. They are based on the visualizations, not based on the data source. So anything you change individual, the table calculation gonna react to it, which makes it very dynamic. So this is another use case for those 4 functions: first, last, index, rank, and so on. For example, you can go and say, let's make the reference line based from the last value in the table, so you can go and switch it. So that's it for those 4 functions. And if you like my content and you want to support the channel, then I really appreciate it if you support, like, and comment. This really gonna help the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.